Well, the activities of the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, that's ICE, have dominated the headlines this week, even as Democrats have linked those headlines to government funding. But there has been much more going on this week. Joining me now to talk about all of it, from the Washington stand, Casey Harper, the managing editor for the broadcast, and Suzanne Bowdey, editorial director and senior writer. Casey, Suzanne, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks, Tony.
All right, so at the top of the program, we discussed the Border Czar, Tom Homan, his press conference this morning in Minnesota. Casey, what was his main message to Minnesota and and he was speaking not just to Minnesotans, but I think he was speaking to the nation.
Yeah, I think that's why the president sent him down there. Things have gotten out of control. The violence is increasing. We're seeing increased protesting. If you take some time to watch the footage coming out of there, you have these roving patrols of ICE agents who are getting harassed everywhere they go. Sometimes it gets physical, and then there's arrest. And when there's arrest, there's a chance that it could escalate. And now we've seen these two very unfortunate shootings. Homan's message, I think, was twofold. There was the what he said, which is we're probably going to lower the number of ICE agents. We need local authorities to cooperate with us so that we can go and get these migrants out of the jails instead of having to go knock down doors or go into the streets. He said, we could avoid a lot of problems and have a safer situation if we could just go into the jails and have people handed off to us. He talked about how he's had good conversations with the state level Democrats who are doing more to cooperate. So that's the what he said. But I think the tone that he said was even more important than that. He was very gentle. He came in there and said, look, guys, he lowered the temperature. And I think that was really what the president needed, and what really the nation needed was an adult to step into the room and say, look, it's going to be fine, and just have a dad moment with the country. And I think he succeeded at doing that.
It's interesting you say that, because I look at Tom Homan. I don't know him. I've not met him before, but he kind of reminds me of his grandpa. A little grumpy at times, yeah. But he's just he's just kind of a no nonsense guy.
Right, tells it like it is.
He does. You just kind of like him. So Suzanne, what caused the Trump administration? I mean, what was the straw that broke the camel's back that they made them realize that they had to do something different?
Well, I honestly think after the shooting, both shootings, actually, I think this last one was a lot less cut and dry in a lot of Americans' minds. I think there's real concern over months of this sort of shock and awe approach to immigration reform and deportations. And I think he started to see the country really turn against the tactics of ICE. In recent polling just this week, YouGov and The Economist found that among Republicans, the trust in ICE has dropped almost 10 points, and that's just in a 2-week period. So Trump really had some damage control to do. Yes, it was important to show the illegal immigrants up front that we're serious about this. We need law-abiding citizens in the country. If you aren't here legally, we're going to take care of it. But to have months of this just real chaotic situation across the country really has not boded well for Trump in public opinion. I think it will have definite effects on the midterm elections if the messaging isn't changed and the approach isn't changed. Americans are rightly concerned. We do need to rein in a little bit some of these tactics, because these ICE agents aren't the bad guys. They're being set up to fail by the people who are deploying them by putting them in these situations where they're literally confronting rioters on the streets. It's making them slower and less efficient at doing their jobs, as opposed to just executing smaller, more precise deportations that aren't making the mainstream news, that aren't creating headlines and unnecessary headaches for the Trump administration.
Yeah, in some ways, this is a case study in the American people and the complexity of the American voter. I think without question, the 2024 election was driven in large part by the immigration issue, and the majority of Americans voted for Donald Trump in large part because he said he was going to deal with an issue that many people see as problematic. And so there's no question this was an issue that Americans wanted dealt with. And I think they supported the president in securing the border, which his team has done a great job at. But there's still an element of the American people that is, I would say, compassionate, merciful, wants justice, even if they can't articulate exactly what it is. And I think those images, some of them, maybe manufactured to some degree, that have been on the TV screens, has prompted people to say, wait a minute, I want immigration reform, but I'm not sure this is what I want.
And it's
Yeah,
ironic because, as you say, the issue that got Trump elected is now what's making him most vulnerable. And I think the American people say the methods matter as much as the measurables here. And they'd like to see a little more justice, a little more mercy. As you had Carlos Duran on last night, he was talking about the fact that these two things aren't mutually exclusive. And they're at risk, really, of destroying the historic inroads they've made with the Hispanic community. You're starting to see some fractures with evangelicals. So it's a serious issue.
All right, it clearly is an issue because the Democrats have seized upon it. You know, Chuck Schumer, I want to play this clip of Chuck Schumer because I have to laugh because, you know, there's truth in what he says, but only partial truth because it is Chuck Schumer. Play that clip we played at the top of the program.
If Republicans refuse to work with us to rein in ICE and to end the violence, they're telling the American people they're choosing to protect ICE over choosing to protect people's safety. Americans, by and large, support law enforcement. I do. And most people support border security. I do as well. But
all right,
Americans
that's enough. We can
support
stop him there. We can stop him there. I mean,
it only
look,
takes so much.
Well, I mean, I support law enforcement. He doesn't support law enforcement. It supports border. Where was he when the border was wide open and Joe Biden was president? What was he doing to shut down that border? They've seized upon this because it is a political leverage point. And they've now tied it to government funding, even though this funding that they're going after with ICE, it's really not there. ICE has already been funded. They're going after the broader Department of Homeland Security. Give us the latest on that, Suzanne.
Well, earlier today, the Senate GOP did have a lunch where I really think there's a growing consensus that we're not going to win this battle necessarily with Democrats over Homeland Security. So what they're really trying to do is isolate Homeland Security funding and protect the gains that they've made on appropriations. I mean, you really have to feel for House Speaker Mike Johnson, who thought he had done something really historic by passing all 12 appropriations bills. These weren't controversial. They had broad bipartisan support. And now all of that work is being upended because Democrats have hijacked the process. So the one way that I think they can sort of salvage this is to strip out DHS, which, as you say, is very disingenuous. ICE is already funded. They're really just punishing FEMA, TSA, the Coast Guard, so many other things. But at this point, it looks like the Senate will maybe succeed in jamming the House. Now, the House won't be back until Monday, so what you'll probably see is a partial shutdown. The real debate now is if they decide to isolate Homeland Security and sort of pass a short-term CR, which is we know is a little funding bridge until they can work something out. How long will that CR be? Democrats would like for it to be short-term. They'd like to get this resolved as soon as possible and get their wish list granted. Republicans would like longer to sort of sit on this and see what concessions are made. But it's a real problem because once you get into this mess of saying, well, I want this included in the bill and now I want this, you hear Senator Graham saying, well, if we're going to vote on this, then I want to say that we're not funding sanctuary cities. And the Democrats are saying we need to, stop deploying ICE. So it's a real horse trading situation that nobody really wanted to get into. They thought this was solved.
Well, and to that point, I brought this up earlier with Andrew Clyde, but you had 8 Senate Republicans that joined the Democrats earlier today in voting against the funding bills. Now, one of those was the majority leader so that he could be on the prevailing side. But these were conservatives who were raising issues, some of them were raising issues about the earmarks. So I have no doubt that that's going to factor into the discussion that they want to take out some of the earmarks that were attached to these funding bills. So you're absolutely right. Once you open this, it's a Pandora's box.
Absolutely. And there's no putting the genie back in the bottle. So it'll be either that we've passed 11 historic appropriations bills and now we have this CR for a very important agency that controls our national security, or we get back into a huge debate over what should be included, which I don't think Mike Johnson or Majority Leader Thune really want.
Casey, anything on that before I move to the next topic?
Sure. I think what Republicans are in danger of doing here is taking one of their best political issues, which, as you said, is immigration, and even, not just securing the border, but Americans broadly support deportations, especially deporting these violent criminals. And up until this point, DHS has done a pretty good job of saying, hey, we're deporting this criminal, this violent criminal. Every day they're coming out with pictures of child predators and, 3-time DUI people that they're deporting. They've taken what's been an asset and they're in danger of making it a liability, and not just in public opinion, but on Capitol Hill. And now this deadline for funding could not be worse timed. So they have quite a pickle that they've been put into right here.
All right, we've got about 4 minutes left. And I want to step back for just a moment because, I sometimes like to do this on the program. I'm kind of a shade tree philosopher. I want to look at the bigger issue here of what is happening, because I think, as I mentioned earlier, a case study in the American people. I think this is a case study in what's happening in our culture. Minnesota continues to be kind of ground zero for this lawlessness. I mean, we saw it during the George Floyd incident, which spread across the country. Hopefully this won't spread across the country. But many people are, they're looking at this and they're saying, was this the fraud and the immigration that triggered this when the federal authorities went in there, or is it the over-aggressive approach that the federal government has taken that triggered this conflict? I would say we need to step back and look at this as something that we've been sowing the seeds of this for quite some time in terms of a disrespect for law and the lawlessness that has taken root in our country. And this is, we can ignore it, but I think we do so at our detriment, because I think our nation is teetering in terms of its ability to stay together, live together, work together, and continue to be one nation under God.
Yeah, Tony. I mean, I think not bad for a philosopher right there. But I think, Jesus said that a kingdom divided against itself cannot stand. And we're still contiguous. We're still one government, but we have two different nations living within this one nation. And one has at least semi-biblical worldview, and one has a half Marxist, half hedonist, half relativistic. And I know that's three halves, but for relativists, it doesn't matter because it's all relative. So, they have these two different worldviews that are coexisting, and we're seeing strife because of that. And the spiritual side of that is the deepest root. So it's not surprising. And I also think it's not surprising that it's coming out of Minneapolis. You mentioned this is where all the George Floyd riots began. I covered a lot of that rioting pretty heavily, and even the whole Black Lives Matter police reform movement, even before that, in Baltimore and in other cities here in D.C. as well. And it's really a spirit of lawlessness. And I think that's, to bring it full circle back to what the Trump administration is doing, I think where they're having trouble is they're trying to take on a spirit of lawlessness and themselves starting to creep into being lawless themselves, or at least appearing lawless in the way they're doing it. And that's why they're having trouble.
And that's what frightens me, is that you cannot protect our republic needs to be protected, but you can't violate the republic to protect the republic. We are a nation of law and order, of rules, and we've got to do it within the confines of those rules. But I think, Suzanne, this goes back to something we've talked about before. It goes back to what we've been teaching our children. It goes back to removing God and the Word of God from the public square. And it goes back to removing it out of our schools. And as a result of that, we have opened the door to these other ideologies that Casey talks about. We've lost that restraining effect of biblical truth.
Right, and I think you have a really great opinion article on the Washington Stand right now, really tracing this back to the leftist march through the institutions. And we really, on top of the spiritual problem, we really just have a common decency problem. We've lost the ability to have a conversation. Violence is so often now the solution to the left. It's really unfortunate because, and this goes for Trump too, we need to be able to have civility as opposed to these like rhetorical bombs that we're throwing back and forth, this combative nature, and really sit down and have a conversation. We've lost the ability to do that in America, and I really think it's hindered our ability to compromise. It's really, really devastatingly sad. It's created more divisions, and at its heart, I agree, is absolutely spiritual, but we've lost just a human to human just notion of being able to sit sit down and discuss things that matter most.
We can have vigorous debates over policy, but we have to have respect for persons because each
Right.
one bears the image of the Creator. Casey, Suzanne, thanks for joining me.